being in a position where you either design or run clinical trials actually is a huge privilege, and once being intellectually stimulating, also brings you into contact with patients in a way that you might not do in routine clinical care. Okay, so I'm Professor Terry Jones. I'm actually trained as a head and neck cancer surgeon, but I'm employed by the university, so I have an academic role where a significant amount of my work is in research into new ways of diagnosing and treating head and neck cancer. But in 2021, I was appointed as Director of Research and Innovation for Liverpool University Hospitals Foundation Trust, and we've been trying to improve the way we deliver research and innovation across the trust since then. So I think it's really, really important that we celebrate Clinical Trials Day. I think clinical trials are critically important for patient care for lots and lots of different reasons, but particularly because an awful lot of the treatments that we provide to our patients at the moment can be improved. I can almost think of no treatment that can't be improved, and therefore we need rigorous evidence to do that, and performing clinical trials is one way to get that evidence. It also allows patients to have access in a very controlled way to novel treatments which may, or one would hope, would benefit their conditions, benefit their treatments. So for lots of different reasons, clinical trials are really, really important. And what we're trying to do, which we've only achieved partly, is to integrate the provision of clinical trials into routine clinical care. Our aspiration would be that every patient who is treated in the hospital is offered entry into a clinical trial. And apart from the reason I've already explained, what we do know, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that simply being on a clinical trial, whether you actually get the drug or the treatment under test, you do better. And that's probably because the care is much more standardized and the follow-up is much more rigorous than what you might get outside a clinical trial. So it's really, really important for us to understand that and for us to put in mechanisms that clinical trial availability is an option for everybody that's treated in any NHS organisation. So in addition to the other jobs that I spoke to you about before, one of my other primary roles is that I'm director of Liverpool Head and Neck Centre. And Liverpool Head and Neck Centre is a formal arrangement between 3 of the NHS trusts in the city. So that's Luft, Clatterbridge and the Walton Centre, as well as the University of Liverpool. And the Head and Neck Centre has 2 aims. It has an aim to improve the quality and safety of patient care, but underpinned by a world-leading translational research programme. And so a huge part of my job in that role is how we can develop what we call translational research programmes. So that's research that starts in the laboratory, but ultimately ends up very close to patient care, including patients being offered a whole wide portfolio of clinical trials that they can become involved in when they present with cancer of the head and neck. But actually, one of the most rewarding things about the trials is getting to know the patients who actually, for all sorts of amazing reasons, choose to become involved in clinical trials. I've got to know some really impressive patients over the years who are very, very well aware that the trial might not benefit them individually, but they're prepared to commit to the trial, if only that the trial would then ultimately benefit patients like themselves who would be treated in future. And that altruism that we see from clinical patients who enter into clinical trials is consistently humbling, and one of the biggest drivers for us to continue to do what we do. Being in a position where you either design or run clinical trials actually is a huge privilege, and once being intellectually stimulating, also brings you into contact with patients in a way that you might not do in routine clinical care, you get to know patients an awful lot more. You get to know what makes them tick. You understand a little bit more about what their motivations are. And all of that is hugely rewarding, not just for me personally running a clinical trial, but the huge multidisciplinary teams that are actually required to run successful clinical trials within an organization. And they're the true unsung heroes of this. From research nurses through to people who collect data, through to the staff in the back offices who record all the data relating to clinical trials and clinical trials units. And then we get the statisticians and the really clever people who analyze the data from clinical trials. All of those people are doing a huge amount of work in the background. And for me personally, it's working with those people as well as the patients who enter into clinical trials that make this a hugely rewarding endeavor.